Hello, this is Jason Lightoller from Woodside. Tonight I'm going to show you how to make this 2x2 ribbed hat that has a shaped crown. This is a request that was submitted and it's done in a UK standard 4-ply yarn in this very bright shade of orange. Orange happens to be my favourite colour and I've got quite a lot of this yarn left behind. I'm using a standard gauge machine for this and it's done on a Japanese machine, but it will work equally well on any European machine that you might be wanting to use. So for a 2x2 rib, on the ribber bed you need to go from full pitch to half pitch. And what that does, it prevents the needles from slamming into each other. If I go back to full pitch here, you will see that if the two needles actually started to knit, they would slam and collide into each other like that, which is not obviously what we need. On half pitch, which is what this setting is, they will gladly bypass and the two beds are now offset. So you now need to bring forward 160 needles to working position, and you can do that either by hand by just bringing out 2 needles, missing 2, another 2 needles and missing 2, another 2 needles and missing 2, or you can use the needle pusher. This arrangement at the top is for a 2x2 needle arrangement, and this one at the bottom is for a 2x1 arrangement. Now the ribber arrangement for a 2x2 rib is that the right hand needle needs to be on the left side of the knitted needle and the right hand side of the ribber needle needs to be in between the 2 pairs of knitting needles there. So if I zoom in, you can see that in between each pair of knitting needles here, you have the left hand ribber needle and the right hand ribber needle is in between the knitted needles here. And if I go to this pair, you can see that the left hand ribber needle is in between the pair of knitted needles and the right hand ribber needle is in between the knitted needles there. So now I'm going to go across and make 2 passes with the carriage just to line everything up. And the very outer edge of the ribber needle we're going to take out of work. And now I'm going to thread the carriages up, and just on the tail end of the yarn I'm going to put this close peg here. So at the tightest possible tension I'm going to make 1 pass across with the carriage. And as you can see, it's made quite a strange looking cast on row. We don't call this the zigzag row because it's unlike the 1x1 rib where it's a clear zigzag pass. It's just called a zigzag row. And now I'm going to hang the cast on comb and put the weights on. So I'm going to go up to tension 1. And what I'm going to do now is set the carriages to do 3 circular rows. But what I wanted to do is start to do the first row, the knit row, on the ribber here. And I wanted to slip on the knitter bed because as you can see here, the last stitch was on the knitter bed. And if I actually get it to slip on the ribber bed first and knit on the knitter, it will mean that this stitch here will drop off. So it's important to get it to knit the first circular row on the ribber. So we're going to do 3 circular rows now. And as you can see here, it's made a very clean pass of the circle. And what we're going to do now is move the pitch lever back to full pitch and move the racking handle 1 notch to the left. And this will now form the correct configuration for the 2x2 rib stitches. So the last thing we need to do before we get going is to transfer this very edge stitch here up to the knitter bed. And now we can begin. So just before we start, what I'm going to do is put a piece of ravel cord in this channel here, and I'm going to lay it in and then just pull it tight. And what this will do is it will create a much firmer cast on edge, and it will prevent everything from spraying outwards, and it will produce a much more neater edge. The other way of doing that, of creating a much firmer edge, is to do a waste yarn cast on. And this tip of using the ravel cord is something I discovered when I watched a video by Sally Butcher. And it actually produces a very quick way of doing the same thing with using the waste yarn method. So the row counter is set at 0. I'm now going to increase the tension to number 4 on both carriages. I'm going to cancel the circular buttons, and the first row may be a little bit difficult, and keeping a very firm hold on the ravel cord, we're going to make one pass going across from right to left. Making sure that everything is knitted as it should, making sure that you give a firm tug on the weights, because this does have a tendency to bunch up. And we're now going to knit 120 rows, making sure that you give a tug on the weights every 10 to 12 rows at the least. There we are, that's 120 rows. So now what we need to do is divide this whole section here into quarters. So here we are, I've isolated the first section of 40 stitches. Now the 40 stitches I have shared between the knitted bed here and the ribber bed here. It's not 40 stitches on the knitter and 40 stitches on the ribber. I've gone 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 and so on and so forth. Just to make that crystal clear, it's 40 stitches between the knitter and the ribber. And the rest on the entire knitter bed and the ribber bed have been put into holding position. So the next step is to decrease 1 stitch each end of this quadrant and then do 2 rows and then another decrease and then do another 2 rows. And it's fairly simple. All you do is you take your transfer tool and then go across and with that stitch, and then from this end you take your double-eye transfer tool and then you just go down to the ribber bed and then you knit 2 rows. Make sure that the empty needles are out of work. Do 2 rows and then you do the same thing again, except this time this is the single stitch here, as you can see. So you're going to be going from the knitter to the ribber and making sure that the empty needle is out of work. And then this is the double stitch here, the double rib. So you're just going to go across from the ribber to the other rib stitch there. And again, making sure that it's in the hook, and then another 2 rows. And then we're going to be doing the same thing. But first of all, we need to hang some weights. So the weights you need to use, first of all, is this 7 hanger, and it's called a 7 hanger because it's in the shape of a number 7. And you need to use a 200 gram weight, which is this one, and it's obviously the smaller of the 2. So you put the weight into the hook there, and then you put 1 at each end. So here, I'm just going to pop that up there like that. And my weight has just come out of the hook, so let me put that back. And we'll put 1 at the other end. Now, I can't stress how vital that is. If you don't do that, then you will have stitches jumping off and everything will fall. Make no bones about it, that is a dead certainty. If you want this section to go smoothly, then you must hang these weights. That is not an option. So we carry on with our decreases. Again, it's just a matter of going to the adjacent needle when there is a pair there, and this single stitch will go up to the knitter, making sure, as I've said before, that all the empty needles are out of work. 2 passes, and we keep going until we're down to the very last 2 stitches, and I'll do that as we're off camera. And of course, you move these side weights up every 3 or 4 rows at the very most. So there we are, we're down to the last 2 stitches, and instead of knitting them off, I'm going to transfer them onto a longer tail end of yarn using the double-eye transfer tool. And they will not run because you've got the yarn that's actually going through them there. And I'm going to show you the next step. So I've isolated the next 40 stitches, so that's 20 on the knitter and 20 on the ribber, and the remaining stitches are still in hold position. Carriage settings remain in hold, And I'm going to now decrease in the same manner as we did on the first quadrant. And what I've done is I've taken the two 400 gram weights off the ribber comb because they were actually securing the first quadrant that we've just done, and that's not needed anymore. So I'm going to just move this first stitch in and put that there. Again, keeping that needle out of work, and just moving this one across and keeping that needle out of work. I'm going to rethread the carriage up and we will continue. And again, I'm going to put the 7 hangers back, and we'll continue with the decreases just as we did with the first quadrant. So again, we're down to the last 2 stitches, and these are going to be replaced by the thread here, the yarn here, and we'll take it off the machine. So the next task is to replace the next quadrant, the next set of 40 stitches into the hooks, and cast off in the same manner as we've done with the first and the second quadrants. I think you get the idea by now, so I don't need to show you that on camera. I'll come back when I've actually done that because the process is exactly the same. And here we are, we have our 4 equal sections at the top where we did the decreases, and we now need to start to join the hat together. But before we do that, we just need to see to the ravel cord that we put in just after we finished the cast on row at the bottom of the hat before we started to knit the main section. So to do that, you take both ends of the ravel cord in your hand and you pull tight. So you're pulling the ends of the rib together, and then you just remove the ravel cord in its entirety. Take it all out. And as you remove it, you will see that now you have a very neat, very closed edge without any of the normal frills that you sometimes get. In fact, virtually all the time you get with this particular type of rib. This is a 2x2 rib, but you also get that with a 1x1 rib or a 2x1 rib as well. So the first thing you need to do in order to assemble the hat is to fold it in half and join the long seam together. So it's from the very edge of this first decrease here right the way down to the bottom of the hat. And you can use whatever method you choose. You can use a linking machine, you can use the knitting machine, you can do it by hand. You could use a sewing machine if you wanted to, if you're careful to match the edges up. I wouldn't advise using the overlocker, especially for a rib, because that produces quite a wide and thick seam, and that's probably not suitable for a rib. So I really would avoid that. But any of the other methods would be suitable. So the first part of the joining instructions are from this section here all the way down. So that's the long edges joined together, and what I didn't mention is that of course you need to do this right sides together. And now the second part is this section here, and it's the first join of the decreases here that extend from the top section of the long edges. So we've done the long edges there, and now the second part is this section here. So the long edges are joined, the short section at the top of the long edges are joined there. The next part is to go right across to the other side and join these 2 short edges together here. So the long edge is done, the short edge at the top there is done, the short edge is done here. And the next thing to do now is to turn it upside down. And what we're going to do is to do the remaining short side there and the remaining short side here. So we're going to do this all in one maneuver. Now, if you are using the knitting machine to join your seams, as I am here, do always make sure you weave in any loose ends that you find. It makes the join much easier. And all you do is literally, as I've done, go over, under, over, under, over, under, just a few needles, probably about 10 or so. I wouldn't ordinarily use a knitting machine to join side seams in a garment, but as this is a hat and the seams are very short, then by all means, I would use this particular method, particularly as I don't have a linking machine for the time being. Now, as I have demonstrated many times before when I've been casting off and attaching neck bands and other bands to garments, whenever you're casting off and you're joining knitwear by knitting machine, always make sure that you do the last 2 rows, the joining rows, at the loosest tension, and always make sure that when you cast off, use a latch tool. Some people don't, they use the gate peg bind off, And that's absolutely fine if you want to do that, but I always say that that produces a too firmer cast off edge. And here we are. This is the finished hat that I've put on Benny. Benny is probably the most famous polystyrene head in Woodside. Obviously, it's not a life-size head. This is rather a small head, and this pattern is made for a standard large adult head, or up to a large adult head. If you didn't want such a wide brim, then by all means, instead of doing the amount of rows that I knitted in the pattern, 120, then just reduce it by 20. And as you can see around the back, the crown is perfectly flat. It's shaped into the 4 quadrants as we saw. And this is obviously just a plain pattern. You can put stripes in if you wanted to, of course. It's entirely down to you. But anyway, that is a shaped crown beanie hat in a 2x2 rib.